Today, I'm with Tiana Felmingham, who has spent more than 20 years working together with different communities and different levels of government to improve community wellbeing. Tiana is currently the Executive Officer at East Gippsland's Primary Care Partnership, which we'll talk about in a few moments. Tiana helps individuals and organisations navigate the world of systems thinking and public health through leadership, learning, embedding it into their everyday practice and demonstrating its effectiveness by measuring local change. Now, Tiana particularly loves the applications of systems thinking in a community setting, and she's actually doing a PhD on it, where the community is at the forefront of leading powerful change on problems that are repeatedly put into the too hard basket for many people. Tiana is a facilitator, presenter, and adult trainer, and can translate strategy into implementation. Now, Tiana's heart sits in rural and remote settings in Australia and in the Pacific region, and she enjoys the challenges state and in a national context brings. So, Tiana, I'm really excited to welcome you today. How are you?
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm well, thank you. Yeah, it's just so lovely to be able to have a chat with you, and particularly about systems, because I love to nerd out about that stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. And where are you coming from today?
So today I am in East Gippsland, and we have a beautiful day here, not by the sound of it, completely opposite to where you are at the moment. But yeah, so I live in East Gippsland, and we're actually also located in one of the fire affected areas of East Gippsland. So I have no doubt that'll pop up in our conversation today.
Yeah, sure. So I'm sure you've been through a lot over the last couple of years. Well, it's a bit gloomy here in Sydney today. So I've got my cuppa, as we say, or my brew, as you say in England, and yeah, really keen to get stuck into it. So we'll kick off. What does well-being mean to you?
I think that's such a good question, and it's really important. A really important time to pause, I think, particularly at this time in the year, following the year that we've had, and to really think about what well-being does mean to each of us. And for me, there's no doubt it's pretty holistic. I think we get drawn into thinking that well-being is about the things that we see, and not necessarily about the things that are happening around us. So well-being, I guess, is all parts of life. It is the physical, and even, we talk about mental well-being, but also that feeling of being connected to the place that you land your feet, and being able to connect with the community around you, I think it plays a really big part in it.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've got a real sense of identity and community in East Gippsland, from the work that you do, which we'll get into shortly. But what are some of the things that you do to look after your well-being?
Yeah, I love that question, because for me, that's really, we've already touched on the fires, but this past 12 months has been a real challenge for lots of people, and me included. I think some of the things that I do with my brain and my time is mostly just making sure that, because there have been times, particularly over the last 12 months, where you just feel exhausted.
Yeah.
And really, sometimes it is really hard to kind of wade through all of the mess and noise to get through to the other side, and really think about what is it that I need to do today to make today the best that it can be. And for me, it's actually a bit of time in the garden. So I am like an 80-year-old in a 40-something body, and I love time in the garden, and I love time with a good cup of tea and being out just pottering around. So I think that's a really important part of it. And one of the things that's actually come through really strongly, and it's something we've been talking about in our house a lot, actually, is the role of volunteering. Okay. And the power that can have in terms of healing and recovery. But the idea that you're giving something out to the world and you're not expecting anything in return, I think is really fulfilling. And it's something that we often don't pay enough attention to, I think. So we do a lot of volunteering in our house, which takes up a lot of time. But at the end of the day, we do it because we love it. And, ultimately we're doing it for, we say, and of course we are doing it for other people in the community, but it just pays back in spades, and it ends up making yourself feel really good about what you're doing. So it's interesting. It's probably not the answer that other people have given you in the past, but in terms of the physical side of it, sure, I love to go swimming and love running and walking and all that kind of stuff, but there's other things for me that are important, or just as important, sometimes more important than that.
Yeah. No, often when I ask that question, it comes out, that people they feel good when they're giving and contributing and helping others. It's kind of reciprocal. You feel good as well. But what are some of the, if you don't mind me asking, some of the roles that you do in the volunteering kind of space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we, as a family, we were contributing to the recovery committees locally. But something that was kind of born out of all of the mess with the fires was one of the things I noticed really early on was that a lot of adults were talking about, that things were really terrible, and they were, but there were a lot of kids just kind of sitting around listening to the conversations. And so one of the things that I immediately did after the fires was taking photos of our house and taking photos of things that were growing, but also things that were broken. And I wanted to almost capture as time capsules as things went on. And so one of the things we did really early on was put in a phone call to a major photography company, camera company, and we're successful in getting a whole heap of cameras donated to local children here. And so the project has come from that tiny little idea at our dinner table and has just exploded. And we now have all kinds of stuff happening and have lots and lots of local kids involved. So it started in our community, but now it's much bigger and covers other parts of East Gippsland too.
Yeah.
But it's very much about the children and young people that we live around feeling like they're being heard. So they take photos of whatever, there's no rules except for private parts, and they take photos of whatever's important to them, and we showcase them on their behalf.
That's awesome.
So just that feeling of the kids listening to adults really pouring over their work and telling them how wonderful they are. It's been a huge difference. So there's that side of it. And then, I'm a serial volunteer. So I, involved in school council and other bits and pieces. But I think every time we have a community event, we actually turn up, as a family, and we're all pitching in to help everyone. And it's given, I've got small children, and it's really given the kids a sense of what community is, and that you go in knowing that you're going in to do something for somebody else. It doesn't matter really. The thing that you get out of it is the fact that you're there.
Yeah, great. And I love the inclusiveness of the camera initiative. I was just talking about it with somebody today, what is inclusion? And they said it's people having a voice, and you're giving those kids a voice and being able to be part of the community and take pictures and that ownership, etc. So I really like that, Tiana. And communities, it's everything, isn't it? It's so important that we're helping each other, and particularly when you've gone through such devastation with all the fires. So well done to you. And in terms of East Gippsland's primary care partnership, and there's been a lot of media around it, and some great work obviously that's happening. But could you tell us the role of the partnership and where it sits in the health and wellness system?
Yeah, no worries. So the primary care partnership is actually a Victorian only strategy. So it doesn't happen in any of the other states in Australia, but I love it. I've been there for a long time, and I love the the whole purpose of the work, really. So essentially it's around collaboration. So it's really around making sure that we're all heading in the same direction at the same time, and that if there are opportunities to work together, that we can do that. And really one of the things that I'm passionate about is identifying areas where we can have collective action. So rather than everybody kind of, I guess there's been lots of different interpretations of collaboration and networking and partnerships. And I think in the past, there's been a flavour of, oh, we come together and we'll tell each other about what we're doing. But in terms of actually collectively working together on something, it doesn't happen very often. And so that's really been the premise of the PCPs for me, is actually around giving people the platform to be able to do that work. So we're very kind of sitting in the middle. We're not with one organisation or another. We're quite impartial. But when there are opportunities to come together, we can put everybody in the room.
Yeah, yeah. And how many organisations is it made up of?
Well, across Victoria, there are over 800. So each PCP varies slightly.
Yeah.
For our PCP in East Gippsland, we cover a really big geographical area and have a smaller population. But saying that, it can be anywhere between 25 and 45 organisations. We have around 25 that are formal signatories, but we work with all kinds of organisations, and including departments and those kind of things. So they are not necessarily formal signatories to the partnership, but they certainly participate in the conversation.
And what is it that you're actually trying to achieve or change?
Yeah, right. It's interesting that you asked that question, because for me, I'm really interested in pretty big change. So pretty big social change. A lot of the PCPs are different, and that's one of their strengths, is around they're different depending on the communities that they're serving. So for us in East Gippsland, we might focus on specific things, but that reflects the priorities that are in our community. But say if we went to the other side of the state, there might be other priorities over there. For us, we really focus on healthy eating and active living as a priority area, mental wellbeing, and also alcohol prevention of first alcohol and drug use. But we're also involved in other areas as well, including prevention of violence against women and some other things. In terms of our PCP, we have a really heavy focus on primary prevention. And so what that means is we're really looking at those things that may not even change in the next 3 or 4 years, but they might change in 10 or 15 years' time. So we're really looking at collective action that is going to catapult our community into a better place in a decade or longer.
It's an interesting one when you're all working on something that is not going to change for quite a few years. In terms, because obviously this all takes a lot of work and a lot of effort and collaboration, and what are some of the things that are really important to get people together, I suppose, around the table to start to work together for you? What you've found?
I think one of the really important things, and I was just reflecting on some of your other comments too about things taking a really long time. And it's probably been something that's really shifted in our work locally of late. And I say probably over the last 3 or 4 years in particular, but maybe even longer, is that I think everybody feels that it's really important to know how we're going. And it seems like such an obvious thing to be focused on, but I think sometimes we get caught up in bigger data sets telling us whether we're progressing or not.
Yeah.
So that might be in Victoria, it's the Victorian Population Health Survey, or there are other data sets like the census and that kind of thing that we look to guide what kinds of activity we need and what are looking to be really complex problems in the area that we're serving. One of the things that is really prominent for me is that doesn't actually tell us how we're going. So often the data sets are really far apart in time, and also you can't necessarily compare one data set to the next because the questions might have changed. Not only that, but by the time the data set's collected and we actually as general public get the information, it's often 12 months or 2 years down the track. And so you're working on activity thinking, yep, we're going to have a really big impact here and we're going to know in about 2 or 3 years' time. But the reality is there are rarely projects that are funded for that long anyway.
Yeah.
And even if it is, how do you attribute what you're doing to that particular change? And so one of the things we've worked on locally is actually identifying local measures that we want to keep watching, that tell us the story about what's happening locally, but also making it a little easier to adapt the action as we learn about what's happening. And this is coming from, years of prevention and health promotion practice, which has really come from an environment of program planning and evaluation, where you have a project, you're funded to deliver a project, you evaluate that one project and then kind of move on to the next one. And we're really starting to bust a lot of that open and say, well, actually, it's not the project we need to be measuring, it's the change we want to see. And so what is it that we want to change? And let's all work towards that at the same time. And hopefully we can have a whole bunch of actions that are working towards that change instead of just one change and then one action following it. Yeah. And so if we can get agreement around, and that's probably where a lot of our work has been in the last couple of years, is around let's get some agreement about what we're actually talking about when we want to change something, and let's all push on that together at the same time. And that means everybody can be involved. It's not about one organisation who's being funded or one organisation who has some certain remit. It's actually everybody that can have a go.
I think that definition of what you're doing, or what you're even trying to achieve, like the meaning of things, probably is, I would imagine it's important to have spent a lot of time on that in terms of the consultation, and so you're all looking at it from the same, kind of same lens.
Yeah,
how long was that process? Was it, because if you're talking all these different organizations that you're bringing together, I would imagine that was a big piece of work in the beginning.
Yeah, so we have stuck to the priority areas that we're working under. And so, for example, we've gone through that process with the Healthy Eating and Active Living Partnership, as well as the mental wellbeing work and also the other groups too. And, it depends on the group and it depends on who you've got sitting around the table, but it can take a few months to get to that point. One of the things we know, and it's probably from the collective impact literature, but also shared measurement stuff, is that if we can actually find a couple of really great measures, and I probably would say, and I say a couple intentionally because it should only really be 2 or 3, we get tempted to capture all this stuff. But if we've got a couple of really awesome measures for one particular topic, if they're the right ones, we'll actually start to see shifts across the board. So we don't need to be watching everything. We just need to be watching the main things. And if we can put some data collection around those couple of main things, we'll start to see shifts across all of the areas, not just 1 or 2.
And you said it's some of you're looking at local measures. What are some of those measures that you're looking at?
Yeah, fantastic. So the ones that come to mind for me straight away, because we've done them most recently, are the mental wellbeing measures. Yeah. So mental wellbeing is a fascinating area, and it's often, for us in East Gippsland, I would say, in all honesty, it's probably something that's been avoided for a long time. We're very good at responding in terms of mental wellbeing and putting psychologists and social workers and that kind of thing in place. But if we're talking about primary prevention, what on earth are we talking about when we're talking about primary prevention of mental wellbeing? Because we're not talking about depression symptoms or anxiety symptoms. Like, what is sitting behind that actually tells us that we're heading in the right direction? And so that piece of work was quite a big piece of work, and we did do that with Shauna, and that was around investigating what's sitting behind mental wellbeing in East Gippsland. We know that the outcomes are not great, but they weren't great before fires, so it wasn't something that just happened because we had an event. And one of the areas that came up really, really strongly in terms of one of the complex problems, there were 2 that we landed on, but one in particular that came up over and over again, stronger than anything else, was social isolation of families and children.
Right.
And so the question then is, well, if our priority is mental well-being, we know our most influential complex problem is social isolation of families and young people. Flipping that to positive language, we're talking about social connection.
Mm.
And which sounds like an obvious thing, but we actually did a lot of work to get to that point. But then the question is, what on earth is social connection? What does that actually look like? And so the question that I always come back to everybody on is, when you're walking down the street or in 2 or 3 years' time, what's happening that's different from what's happening now? What are we looking for? What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What do you smell that's different from what's happening now? Because it's really easy to go, oh, we'll just wait for such and such population survey to come out and they'll tell us whether we've got a connected community or not. What does connected community even look like? And so we started to really unpack that. And one of the things that came out in terms of measures, it was really exciting actually, because it came out really strongly, was that children and young people have their voices heard in high-level decision-making arenas. And so when we're talking about what does it look like when families and children are not isolated, it's that their voices are heard in all of these other areas. And it's not one youth program. This is about all of East Gippsland and looking at what everybody can be doing to actually raise the profile of that. Unbeknownst to me, I was already doing the photography project. Yeah. I had no idea about those connections. That kind of came up afterwards, but and I definitely do that on my own time and in my own little village.
Yeah.
So yeah, we had no idea about that connection at the time, but over and over again, we were starting to get this same dialogue around when we're talking about families feeling included. You talked about inclusion before.
Yeah.
When somebody's feeling included and worthwhile, it means that they're being heard. And one of the things that we kept coming back to as well was that there's actually, we noticed, huge implications, not just for the children and young people who are being heard, but for the adults around them that are watching that happen. And so we end up with more positive mental well-being for everybody as a result of children and young people being heard. So that's one of the measures that is in place at the moment, is looking at how do we know. And so one of those is around when we're looking at strategic planning of different businesses, strategic planning, bushfire recovery committees, organisational planning, all of that kind of stuff. How do we know that children and young people have had an opportunity to contribute to that? Are they represented on boards? Do they have an opportunity to feed into a board in some way? And so that's actually something that we're measuring at the moment and watching.
Yeah, it just shows you, doesn't it? Sometimes the best ideas are the most simple, and you go through all that work defining things, and then you can kind of roll it up into it's about young people having a voice and being heard, and then what programs can you put in place to do that on a mass scale, not just one.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's that going to?
Because it is really tempting to go, well, that organisation's got that.
Yeah.
They've got that project, and I think that that's probably one of the really big shifts in thinking that I've seen over the time, which is I'm just so proud of in terms of our region, is it's not about territory anymore. It's not about what organisation is funded to do what thing. It's actually, we're all doing this together. And actually, if you've got a project that's similar to my project, isn't that awesome? Because now we have 2 projects that are trying to work towards the same thing, instead of everybody kind of leaning towards, oh, that's their thing, that's their project, mine's going to be the same as that, so I won't do it. Actually, we need more of those things and more of those opportunities. Yeah,
and removing the ego, isn't it? It's much more about the impact that you want to do collectively, as you've said. So, in terms of your PhD that you're working on, just concurrently to all this work, and I think that's focusing on community-based systems dynamics. How does that fit into what you're talking about? And can you share some of the insights from that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things about academia is that it does have to be separate from what I'm doing at work. So there is an element of that, but I've been a practitioner all that time. I haven't been in academia at all, and actually was in the past and probably wasn't that great at it. But here I am doing a PhD. So I came across community-based system dynamics around 4 or 5 years ago. And I saw it being presented somewhere else. And I thought, oh yeah, maybe we could have a crack at that. Not sure. So we got some trainers who are here in Victoria and at a university, and got them to come out and do a bit of work with us for a couple of days. And East Gippsland's really fascinating in that I think we're kind of that distance between Melbourne and Canberra that most people haven't paid much attention. We're far enough away that we kind of slip under the radar for the most part. But
what's the population there? Sorry, what's the population?
Yeah, no, about 40,000, maybe a little more, but spread over a huge area. So, well, when I say huge, nothing compared to WA, Northern Territory and Queensland, and even rural parts of New South Wales. But for Victoria, we're probably one of the largest. Yeah. And we have so many different communities here. We have farming communities and tourism communities. And I often think, you know, before the fires, I used to describe East Gippsland as the Great Ocean Road that people haven't quite discovered yet. And slowly people are now discovering us.
Which is good.
But yeah, which is, you know, it's lovely for tourism and all of that kind of stuff. But there was an element of being a bit anonymous, I suppose, and hiding a bit of privacy there. But yeah, so we started kind of and that comes back to my point around the community-based system dynamic stuff. One of the things that was unbeknownst to us at the time was that this training was also, you know, over the last couple of years has been run in other sites, and for the most part, people have asked the facilitators to run the sessions in their communities, but not so for East Gippsland. They just jump in the deep end, and everybody here is very much, I don't know if it's the distance from the city, but it's very much just get on and do it. Yeah. Kind of attitude. And anybody that has grown up and spent a long time here is really familiar with that sense of, we just get in and have a go. So unbeknownst to us, we were doing this work kind of rogue. And one thing led to the next, and I ended up, we started to see some changes and locally, and we didn't know whether they were good or bad things, but we saw that there was some moving happening and contacted the university and said, hey, we're noticing that there's something shifting. Can you give us a consultant? And they said, yeah, sure. And then came back and said, actually, we've realised that nobody else is asking these questions. Would you be interested in coming to do your PhD with us? And wow. So there I was, yeah. Wow. So one of the really interesting things that I found, given that I'd worked in prevention and health promotion for such a long time, and because we, like you say, we're talking about really long change over a long period of time and big social change. And so there's lots of times, I think, in health promotion where you do go, oh, maybe this is just all too big. I just need to take a break. And I don't know that I don't know whether my contribution is really making that much difference. I want to be able to do this. I know I'm part of the bigger picture, but it's really hard to put my finger on it sometimes. And so over the years, there were times where I was really motivated and other times where I just thought, where am I in this mess? I don't get where I fit. And then I came across systems. And, you know, different people have said, oh, it's a bit of a fad, you know, it'll pass and it'll go away. And I just feel like once you start thinking in systems, you can't unthink it. You can't unknow it. And now, and particularly with community-based system dynamics, for me, I loved the element of community taking control of their own outcomes. And it's very much around putting the community, putting everyday people in all kinds of roles into decision-making situations where they have the opportunity to implement action that's important to them. And so it's not about waiting for an organisation to come and deliver something. It's actually really flipping that power dynamic to say, if you want to see this change happen, let's all be part of the change together. And it, blew me away as soon as I saw it happening, and I loved it. And it's based on work from Peter Hovmand, who has written a book with the same name in about 2014. So it's relatively new, saying that system dynamics is not new. It's been there for a really long time. And but I really love, the community aspect for me is probably the most important part of it. And the idea that organisations can step back and really give the community control of the things that are affecting them, I think is just so powerful. So that's how I've ended up doing that stuff. But for me, one of the really, and it comes back to the measures, and it's probably reflective of some of my interests anyway, is around how do we know? We're talking, say, for example, I've just talked for a couple of minutes about why I think community-based system dynamics is really amazing. But what does that mean? What does success even mean? When people look at systems and people look at community-based work and they say, wow, what you've done has made a really big difference. That was so successful. What are we talking about when we're talking about success? How do we know something's been successful? Particularly when we're talking about really long time change, what kind of things can we be looking at that are short term? One, that tell us that things are changing, but in particular, how do we know whether systems are changing? And how do we dig a little more deeply around what people's perception of success is?
Yeah. It comes back to those definitions you were talking about at the beginning, doesn't it? And as you know, the system's ever changing. So it's it's not that it's static and stays the same. And I suppose talking about one of the systemic challenges of our time when we think about chronic disease or chronic conditions, and I'm asking a systems person here. So this is quite an interesting question, because I'm gonna ask you, if you could nudge one part of the system to improve the health and well-being of Australians, what would that be? And as you know, with systems, it's never just one. There's never just one factor. But if I had a gun to your head and said, what's the one thing? What would that be?
I think you're right. There's not going to be one part to it. But I think, and I kind of come back probably to most of the theme across the conversation, is really around everybody contributing and everybody being part of the change. Because the reality is none of this is going to shift with one activity or one changing. And it comes back to what systems is about, doesn't it? You change one part, it doesn't really change much. And so it's around understanding the relationships between all of the stuff that's happening. But for me, if I could change one part, it's that realization that everybody has a role to play. Everybody can do something. And it might be in different areas, but that everybody is contributing something. And it might be that what they're contributing is having a negative effect, but it's having an effect of some kind. So if I was going to change one part, it would be around having a magic wand to kind of impart that message, but to be able to have the opportunity for everybody to be involved in those kind of decisions, so that they can feel that contribution and go, what I think and what I contribute is mattering, and I have the opportunity to change things. Yeah. So I don't know that it's one part, but maybe lots of parts. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think what's coming through really clear is that for you, it's about people having an opportunity to say what they feel, and be able to contribute, and for communities to really take, to be changing from within. Yeah, so it's not an organisation coming in and doing a bit of work. It might work for a little bit, but it's not going to be sustainable, is it? So
Yeah, and that's really the premise of system dynamics, isn't it? Around that, without wanting to go to any jargon, but that endogenous view of being able to say, I am part of the system, and what I contribute actually has the possibility to change what I'm seeing. And so thinking about what is it that I come with and how can I change that?
Yeah. Awesome. And moving on to my last question, we've got here already. In terms of yourself, where do you see yourself in the system, and how do you contribute to it and influence it?
Yeah, gosh, that's such a huge question. I think, and in so many ways, it links back to the other question. My contribution is about creating the space for other people to change the system. And so whether that's through the Primary Care Partnership platform, whether that's through volunteering and having the opportunity for people's voices to be heard. But I think ultimately that's how I see my role in the system is very much being able to create the opportunity for other people to step in. And I think, I've done quite a bit of thinking about power of late, and empowerment in particular. And I think it's a really, really interesting concept, and particularly around inclusion, where, if you have power, or if I have power, and I want you to have more power than I have. Maybe I'm the all-powerful person and you need more power. I can't pick up my power and give it to you. That's not going to change anything. I can't give my power up and you can't take the power from me. It's something that it's not something that can be passed on to somebody else. What I can do is just get out of the way. And I think the opportunity to get out of the way is there for everybody, but it often doesn't get taken up. And so often people, we talked a little bit before also about organisations coming in and running projects. And that's something that has been a really big transition here in East Gippsland, and it's certainly not perfect. But the idea that an organisation might get out of the way and give control of a bucket of money to the community, that's a hard thing for people to get their head around. To be able to say, actually, we're just going to totally step back and let the community come up with their own stuff with that 100 grand, whatever it is. So I think that really works in so many different platforms. And, even coming back to our first conversation around young people's voices for us living here, all my role is to connect them and give them a platform to be heard.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are creating their voices, and they choose at every point, we've built into the project, at every point they choose how they want to share their work and if they want to share their work and what platforms that's shared in. And so apart from us kind of doing the admin at the back, it's actually the kids' project. And I'm sure it's not perfect either, but that opportunity to actually get out of people's way can sometimes be really challenging. And, we've seen that even this week and last week around conversations around women and in politics and in all kinds of spaces. And, that opportunity for people to really stand up, but also to get out of the way so the conversations can happen in really honest and open ways, make a huge difference to how the messages are received.
I think you should carry on that reading around power, and because I think you're so right. We sometimes are afraid of letting go, and even if you look at organizations and you're trying to empower your teams, or people might fail to begin with, or the organizations you talk about give the people in the local community $100,000 to start off their projects, and in the beginning they might not get everything right, but just stay in the course to allow people to grow and create the things themselves will have that better effect or longer term impact. So I really like that you brought that in, because I think it's it's something that we can all do a little bit better with, just getting out the way. So
Yeah, which is hard. It's, that's not an easy thing to do, particularly when you're funded in a certain way and you're expected to deliver certain things.
Yeah.
But that even in terms of government and structures and things like that, what is it that they can be doing to actually move aside and help communities progress the things that they want to see happen.
Yeah, and enable others, isn't it, to step into it. So, okay, well, that just about comes to the end, Tiana. Is there anything else that we've missed or you'd like to share?
No, I don't think so. Apart from saying thank you for having me. And it's always, I'm studying part-time, obviously, because I'm working and stuff like that. And I was just talking to some fellow PhD students last week, and I was talking to them about, there's no doubt there are times where you're PhD, you're pulling your hair out and things are really hard. But at the same time, oh goodness, it's just such an indulgent luxury to be able to research something that I love and to be able to completely immerse myself in that stuff. And so I want to thank you for this opportunity as well, because it's always so fabulous to talk to other people who get systems and who think in systems as well. And it's always refreshing, and it's always, a lovely indulgent moment to be able to think and talk about all of that kind of stuff with people who get it.
Well, I wish, but you're very kind in your words. I wouldn't say, I'm a complete systems thinker, but it's definitely something that I love, and I see the value in it as you've talked about. And once you've looked into systems, it's hard to kind of flip back. So it's always great to chat with somebody who's obviously living and breathing it, and obviously using it for the betterment of communities. So Tiana, it's been lovely to talk to you. I wish you all the best with your volunteering, and I know you're a mum, and you've got East Gippsland as well, so obviously a lot of hats. So make sure you look after your well-being for the rest of the year, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. It's been lovely.
Yeah, speak to you soon. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.